Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm TR Daly and I'm a young adult science fiction and fantasy author. So I'm coming at you guys today with 5 things that agents are looking for on the first page. Now, I went to a conference last week and there was a panel there with about 9 agents and I think 1 or 2 editors, and they were reading the first page of anyone brave enough to submit. And when they gave feedback, without knowing that they were doing it, they were giving out great general information about what they're looking for on a first page. So that is what I'm coming at you guys with today. The general information that I have compiled and now I'm giving to you. So I kind of bundled it up into 5 different sections. All the different notes kind of revolved around these things. So we will start with number 1, which is setting. So setting, the very first thing that they're talking about is making sure that you've set place and time. Make sure we know kind of where your characters are and kind of when they are. You don't have to be like, oh, it's 4:53 in the morning, but just even like a general idea of the period. Make sure it's clear. If you've got characters who are wearing like Victorian era clothing, but they have cell phones, like that could be confusing. Maybe they're at a Renaissance fair or something, but just make sure that you're very clear about that. Make sure you've put your characters somewhere. It's not just like talking heads. Paint out a picture of where they are and what they're doing. You want to set the setting early enough so you know where the action is happening. I can hear my dogs in the bedroom growling. They're like, let me out. Make sure to add sensory details, because sensory details are what adds voice to your work. And that big V on voice it's the gold mine. That's what everyone's looking for, right? You want voice in your work. Now, sensory details come in, visual, what is there, what you're seeing, but also like, what are you smelling? Maybe the character's eating something. What do they taste? If they're in a restaurant, what do they smell? What are they hearing? But be careful with that, because you don't want like a laundry list of sensory details either. You don't want to say, this is what they see, this is what they hear, this is what they smell, because then agents kind of, what they said at least, is that they kind of start knowing where you're going. You're like, okay, this is a laundry list of sensory details. I know there's gonna be a taste. I know they're gonna hear something. So you don't want like all of them. Just give it a feeling of where they are. Pick a couple. Did you hear my laundry go off? But yeah, just pick a couple and go from there. Number 2, voice. Like I was talking about, the big V, the big voice that you want in your book. This is the next thing that they were really big on. If you have a great voice, it will draw them in and they will immediately feel and care about your characters because you've got the voice. Now, what the heck is voice? I could make a whole episode on what voice is, and maybe I will. But in short, voice is about taking your character and putting in their personality into the text, into what they see and feel. Because every character, every person has a different view on the world. And some people, characters, are going to see things differently than other people. Like you could see an orange light and some people would think that's kind of eerie and spooky, an orange light in the distance, I don't know. And some people would think that's warm and soothing. And because you have different characters and of course different, like a feeling that you're putting into your book, just make sure that the voice is there. Then every character is going to have different word choices too. Make sure if you have like a gruff, raw character, they're using words that feel like rocks in a, rotating, like something, like raw. But if you have like a sweet sensory character, they're going to use like supple word choices. Like it's like a different, just make sure that you have different feelings in your word choices. Another thing that they talked about is making sure that your voice matches your age group. Now, when you're writing for different age groups, you've got Like you've got your picture books, right? You've got like for little kids, you've got chapter books, you've got middle grade books, you've got young adult, and you've got adult. And you want to make sure that when you're writing an adult book, you're not using words that convey like something very simplistic that a middle grade reader would be reading, and vice versa. You don't want adult language for a middle grade book. And that's obviously two ends of the spectrum, but you want to make sure that the word choices that you're using convey what your age group is as well. One more thing that helps add voice that they were talking about is to make sure you're changing up your sentence structure. So make sure you have short sentences and long sentences, and you go back and forth between the two, because this helps it adds personality and voice to your writing. But I mean, sentence structure is an art of its own, because you want to have a few short sentences, and short sentences are short and choppy, which means it speeds things up. And then when your reader kind of has relaxed a little, then you give them that long sentence that they have time. My laundry went off again. Then you give them that long sentence that they have time to kind of soak in, and then jump back, and then go back to short sentences. And there is an art to it, but make sure that you are changing your sentence structure, because it at least adds personality and voice into your writing. Number 3, I put this in an information category. It made the most sense. So information is just how much information you're giving to your reader. So the first and foremost thing is obviously don't info dump. And I know guys, how much do I put in? How much is info dumping and how much is not info dumping? How much is too much and how much is not enough? And it's a balance. I get it. You don't want to overload a reader. You don't want to overwhelm them with too much information. Focus on what's happening with your character and what's important to them, and then just sprinkle in kind of information about where they are and what they're doing, knowing full well that in the next chapter, next 2 chapters, you can then expand out on the world. You don't need all of the world all at once. You don't. I promise. Another thing you want to do is have clarity, guys. Make sure that everything is super clear and concise. Your word choices have to do a lot. Make sure that when you pick a word or a sentence, that it's doing more than just one thing. And I know that's difficult, but if you can be describing something and talking about how a character feels about a thing while talking about what they want to do with the thing, like then suddenly that sentence does a lot more than just describe. I guess that's not being clear, but that was a really good example of sentences doing a lot and being concise. No, for clarity's sake though, you want to be clear. So make sure that you're not using too much description in a paragraph that could be written more concisely. Make sure you know exactly where the character is, what they're looking at, and you don't have to do it in that many sentences. And lastly, don't be repetitive, especially in not only just the first page, but the first paragraph. Try not to repeat words, try not to repeat phrases. I actually saw it a lot in the first pages that I've seen recently, where like you get, when you're describing something, you get stuck on a word. You're like, it's the, let me think of a word that I haven't seen a lot of because I don't want anyone to think it's their work. Let's talk about darkness. The darkness closed in, and then like a few sentences later, oh, it was dark outside. Oh, we had to turn a light on because the darkness was there. There was blackness, and then you start using other words. So you get stuck on a word and a concept and a thought, and you feel like maybe you're not conveying it well enough, so then you end up being repetitive with it. But the best thing you could do is to smash all of that together in a very concise, neat sentence that conveys the darkness that you want to convey. And know that your reader isn't skipping over it. They are aware of the darkness now. It's there. It's just like suddenly the lights have turned off. The darkness is there. So just make sure that you are very concise about it and very clear. Number 4 is about emotion. It's about getting that feeling right, You want to get the feeling of the book from the get-go. So if you're writing something that has a lot of action in it, make sure that first page has action. If you're writing something spooky, make sure you are delivering an ambiance of fear and scariness. Just make sure that you've got a little bit, even if it's just a taste, of what the rest of the book is going to have. If you have kind of an ethereal novel, if you have something romancy, like even if nothing romancy is happening on the first page, just have a thought, or your word choices should at least deliver a promise that the rest of the book is going to have the thing that's in the first page. The one thing that they did say was to be careful with starting with humor, because not everyone has the same sense of humor. So you could write something and think that's hilarious, but other people aren't going to think it's funny. Flip that, you could write something that's not funny and they could think it's funny, which is also difficult. But be careful with humor, especially if you're trying to be funny. Writing humor books is very hard because everyone has a different sense of humor. So just be aware of that and be careful with it and make sure you're doing it well. Another thing they talked about is character names. Now you don't have to say the character name on the first page, but they said at least put me, the reader, in a setting and know what the character wants and why they want it, and make the reader care for the character and what they're doing. Even if we don't have a name or a description, if we know what the character wants on page 1, you can be invested from page 1. So make sure that you know where they are, when they are, if you need to, and what they're doing and what they want, because you want your reader to care for the character right away. Anything that happens in chapter 1, make sure that it's getting internalized into the reader. Make sure that they are caring for your character. Another thing that they mentioned is a lot of times, they always talk about starting in media res, which is starting in the action. And one thing that they talked about is that they don't usually connect if you are starting with a shock factor. Like if you're starting with something shocking like nudity or blood and gore, stuff like that, like something that's shocking, they don't often connect with that. At least this panel of agents didn't. The best way to make your readers care and connect to your character is by giving that character something that they really want, a reason that they can't have it, and just making sure that the reader knows that and is excited about it. Another thing that they said is if your character starts off confused, your reader starts off confused. Now, I have read books that have done very well where the characters start off confused. So I can't say that that is like a blanket statement that's for every book. Obviously, if you have your character starting off confused, amnesia, etc., make sure you're doing it well is my suggestion, which is great advice. Just do it well. That's just my end point. But if they do start off confused and they don't know what's going on, and if you are overloading the reader with a lot of details, like, oh my gosh, what is happening? Sensory details here, color over here, and like the character's confused, the reader's going to be confused too, because you're not setting up that scene and setting to like really place someone in the story, and the character doesn't immediately want anything except to understand what's going on, and the reader already wants to understand, so like you need to get past that into what does the character want next. Number 5, dialogue. Make sure, for starters, that your reader knows who is talking. I know he said, she said, make it simple. You don't need like fancy tags or anything. You don't need the adverbs. And maybe you don't want to say their names right away, but make sure that you're giving the reader something to know who's talking, especially on the first page. Later in the book, it's much easier to go back and forth between characters because you've already set up a whole lot of stuff. So you kind of have an idea of who's in the scene. You have an idea of their different voices, and you've already walked into the scene, but this is the first page. So if you have dialogue on your first page, make sure it has a tag as to what name is speaking. Make sure you've already introduced the character, or if they're being introduced on their dialogue tag, make sure it's right next to it so they know exactly who's talking. Make sure, especially on the first page, and honestly in the rest of the book, you don't have any small talk. I am an introvert and I hate small talk. Give me the juicy stuff, guys. Make sure that there's no, oh, how are you, Fred? How are you today? Oh, I'm fine, George. Like, you don't need that. You don't need that. Tell me something interesting about Fred and George. Why did I don't know. We're apparently with the Weasleys, guys. I'm sorry. But make sure that your characters are going back and forth about something very interesting, something that's immediately going on, something that your main character, who is maybe Fred or George, wants. You know, have the dialogue be meaningful. There's one more thing that they mentioned, which is the as you know dialogue. As you know, George, you've been my brother for 23 years. Well, I guess, you know what, it's still a good example. I was gonna say best friend. Brother, it's fine. Those characters already know if they've been best friends or brothers for 23 years. They already know that. The audience does not know that, and that is why you're saying that. But you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. You can have it internalized as a character if you feel the need to say it, but honestly, it's not even, the chances of an as you know statement being something that's not necessary to put in not only your first page, but in the book in general, is highly likely. It's probably something that you want your reader to know, but they actually don't need to know. It's something that you can paint in later. So you can paint in that they've been best friends for years by talking about something that they've done when they were little. You know, even like a short paragraph, a short quip of it is very useful. So I have a bonus one, which is technicalities, because they mentioned, the agents mentioned this, and I thought it was so funny. They got a lot of first pages, and I can only imagine that they get hundreds and hundreds of queries a week, maybe a day, depends on the agent. But one thing they asked for, guys, is only use Times New Roman, 12-point font, 1-inch margins. And I'm sure that they would probably prefer a double-spaced page too. Just do the thing. Like, you have spent so much time on your book, on your baby, for an agent to open it up and say, ah, oh, crap, it's in Courier. No, like, just make it nice and formatted so that they don't open your work that you have worked so hard on and go, oh gosh, you don't want that. You don't want that. When someone opens something that you've worked on. Like, Times New Roman, 12-point font, 1-inch margins, double space. It should be like a mantra. We should just have a mantra that says that. You've worked too hard for that. You've worked too hard to not do that, so do that. In the end, the agents were talking about the good stuff that they're really looking for. One of them is atmosphere. They really want to be placed in the scene. They want a voice. They want to just be filled up with a space and a character and have like, they want to be swept away in story. Honestly, don't we all? The other thing is dread. Dread and anxiety. Oh gosh, what is going to happen next? Basically, you want that first page, by the time you get to the end of it, your goal is to make them turn the page. Whatever is at the end of that page, make sure it is enticing to turn to the next page. So agents are all humans, guys. They're literally just like you and me, and they love books. And they actually gave all of these pages a really fair shot. They will spend the time that needs to be spent reading the first page. They want to find a good book. They want to find something that they want to represent and be passionate about. So a lot of agents will overlook things that they know can be changed and fixed because you've got time until publication to do that between having just an agent and then having an editor. They know that. So a lot of them overlook that kind of stuff and give your work a fair chance. So make sure it's up to par. Now, however, I have seen agents, it didn't seem like any of the agents on this panel are that way, but I have seen agents that if they're reading your first page and you have a grammar error or a spelling error, they will stop reading and reject you right there. Now, I think that they do this because you have slaved over that first page. You've slaved over the first chapter. I know because I've done it. You've rewritten it over and over and over again. So there shouldn't be any errors, right? You have slaved over it, right? So if they see one, they think, oh, then there's probably some later in the book. And yeah, there probably is, but you don't want them to think that on the first page. So just make sure it's very clean. Read it out loud, print it out, just the first page, the first chapter. Read it not wherever you usually write. Like if you're in an office, leave the office with your first page. Go outside and read it outside. Read it to the squirrels. Literally, not kidding. Find some squirrels. They're great listeners. Not crazy. What I'm saying is just read it outside, read it somewhere else so that you, and have other people read it, have your betas read it, have a friend read it, have your mom read it. Your mom's gonna tell you it's great, so maybe not your mom, unless your mom knows about writing, I guess. I don't know, I'm not here to judge. Just read it a lot and make sure that there are no errors. That is my point. Alright guys, that's all I have for you today. If you liked what you saw here today, feel free to like and subscribe. I post videos every Thursday, and I will see you later. Hi, Alice. Thank you. I got a toy. Thank you. No take, chipmunk. Yeah, go show Daddy.